everything.
Alright guys, today we're going to be doing Learn AngularJS Part 3, Build a AngularJS Wikipedia API. Now let's take a quick look at what we're going to be building. You'll see right here, we're going to have our little bit of selfless promo here, but we're also going to have this link right here that's going to search a random Wikipedia article. We just used an image to do so. We're also going to be able to search in the Wikipedia thing here and go ahead and click search. And then you'll see you'll get a link from the API that we're then going to be able to go and pull up this this Wikipedia page as well as a paragraph description. And we're just going to separate it with the horizontal rule. So not a lot of styling, but we're going to be using the Wikipedia API in this one. And we're going to be doing it in AngularJS. If you're interested to do it in jQuery, I have other videos doing that as well. But right now, let's go ahead and get started by creating a new pin. First thing that we're going to need to do here is, for me, I'm going to go ahead and go into settings real quick and go to behavior, and then we want to turn off auto updating just because it's a little bit of a headache. And then we're going to attach the library. In this video, we are going to be using Angular, so in our JavaScript, and we're also going to be using in our CSS a little bit of Bootstrap. So let's go ahead and add those to everything right now, and we'll get started. I like to get started by getting our app going. So first thing we need to do is create our application. We're gonna do this by creating a variable called app, and we're gonna set this equal to angular.module, and then we're gonna name our application in here. This wiki app is the name of the app. When we call it in our HTML, we're gonna not call app, we're gonna call wiki app. So now that we've done that, we've instantiated this variable, which is actually our application. In here, this would be where our dependencies go. In this example, we don't have any dependencies, but you still have to include this empty array. If you had some additional dependencies, you could, of course, include it there. Now we're going to go ahead and create a controller. To do that, we're going to call our app, and our JavaScript app, and then we're going to say .controller, and then we're going to name our controller similar to how we named our wiki app, except it's going to be wiki ctrl for controller. And then in here we're going to have a function that's going to take in a variable called scope. This is what's going to bind our data, which this should be somewhat reviewed, but I'm going to be going over it as we continue on. And we're also going to be passing in this HTTP, which should also be reviewed, parameter, which will allow us to do our get API calls. In this example, we did our API calls a little bit differently, so don't get too confused about that. But let's go ahead and finish up our setup here. Cool. So if you've watched some of my videos, one of the things I like to do personally is I like to go ahead and I like to create a variable called VM and set that equal to our scope object, just to make things a little bit better and shorthand when we're doing Angular. It saves us a little bit of typing room. You don't have to do this if you just want to do scope or if this is confusing in any way for you. Now the next thing we're going to do, now that we've set up the basics of it, and we can go ahead and what I like to do to make sure I didn't make any syntax errors in CodePen or anything like that, I'll just create a simple variable we'll call vm.test. We'll set this equal to works. This is what I like to do when I'm setting up my app, just make sure before I hit the ground running, everything's good to go. Right now we're not doing anything with our data, so don't really sweat it. So in our HTML, we're just going to create a body tag here. And in our body tag, we're going to define our application. The way that we do that is with the ngapp directive, and we're going to set it equal to our wiki app, the same name that is in here in our Angular module. So we're going to wiki app, excuse me. This is basically going to be the scope of where our application is going to run. Now let's go ahead and do that. Now we need to define the scope of where our controller is going to run. In our example, we only have one controller, but you can have multiple controllers in our app. So we're going to go ahead and do this with ng-controller, and we're going to name the controller here. So in here we named it wiki ctrl. Now that we have that set up, we have everything we have minus this line 4 and 5 is the basics of what you need to set up your Angular application, and this is a good place to test to see if our data is working. So our vm.test, we're just gonna go ahead and console.log test, or not console.log it, but output it, and when we run it, you'll see that right here, it's small, but we have the word works. That means our Angular app is set up, our data binding is working properly, and everything is good to go. So what we're going to do next is we can go ahead and get rid of this variable. Now, if you want to do it the same way, instead of actually, if you remember correctly, let's go ahead and pull up the file real quick. In our application, when I did this, I put AngularJS, Wikipedia API, free code camp, intermediate front-end projects, and I did this YouTube API section. So the only thing that's going to be different is you can go ahead and put by your name. We're going to go ahead and just continue and make the same thing as me because I want people to find this and then go to my channel. So that's why we're going to do it that way. But basically, you should just put by your name, by your LinkedIn, or whatever it is that you want to promote yourself. Now, to get started, there's a couple things that we should do. First, we should get rid of this test value now that we know everything's working. The next thing that we can do is we can go ahead and create our header. So the way I did it was I had an h1 tag where we put in AngularJS Wikipedia API, and I created a object here. Now you could hard code this in there. I don't like to do it because I find it a little bit easier just to find the objects, but it really is just up to you how you prefer to do this and how you prefer to organize your code. I think it's a little easier to organize our code this way. So we're gonna have this key value project pair here, and we're just gonna pass in AngularJS Wikipedia API, and then we're gonna pass in another thing that we're gonna put site. You can name these whatever you want. I just named it site. I try to name things to be as intuitive as possible, and this is gonna be our free code camp. And then we put dash intermediate front end projects. And then for me, I have, now this would be where you, let's go ahead and close that. This would be, excuse me, where you would set up your name. In my example, I'm going to be doing my channel. So you do my name, we're gonna do my channel, so just so I follow my code so I don't make any errors along the way. And then in this example, we have youtube.com/coding tutorials 360. Now this is typically how if I know the data beforehand, if I know the content that I'm going to be outputting, I always will do it in this fashion. I'll just kind of get this static, what I call static data out, stuff that's not going to change for the most part, and then I'll have my channel URL, which is going to be the passed in later on for the nghref. So we're going to have youtube.com/coding tutorials 360. Cool, so we have this header info in our controller, like so. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go over here and just start connecting the data now that we have it set up. So in our H1, we are going to call headerinfo.project, headerinfo.project, and then we're gonna do the same thing in an H3 tag. Let's go ahead and close this now. Oop, not close it. Keep it a little bit open. Headerinfo. Let's create the H3 first. So we have H3. Now that we have that, we're going to go ahead and create headerinfo.site, and then we'll go ahead and test that as well. Just going to run this. Cool. So you'll see all our stuff's connecting. Now I try to include a different library or a different skill sets in each one of these, and so one thing that I'm going to include is FontAwesome's icons. If you're not familiar with FontAwesome, I don't know if it's a team or one guy, but basically makes hundreds of icons, and they're widely used around the web, and it's something you should probably get comfortable with using this open source sort of stuff. And you can buy enterprise applications. He just had a successful Kickstarter for FontAwesome 5 that raised like $700,000. You know, God bless him and the open source community and things like that. So I'm going to introduce you to FontAwesome real quick, but before we do that, we're going to go ahead and create a anchor tag. And this we're gonna do href. We're gonna use nghref. The reason you use nghref is so that it loads this in time. If you have a lot of Angular and your application's loading longer, it may take a second for this to load, and someone may click this before it does. So we're just holding off on that, basically. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's really the basics of what you need to know. And we want it to open a new page, so we're going to set it equal to target is equal to blank. Now, once we have that going, we're going to go ahead in our anchor tag. We're going to wrap this with an H2 because we want our content to be larger. Now, we haven't put that content in there yet, but we will shortly. Let's go ahead and save that. Now, to use FontAwesome, you're going to need to go ahead and import a few things. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. So I'll show this on the screen just for a moment, but actually I'll put it in the video as well. So you're going to go into your header section. Now, if you're doing this in text section, this would be in your head section. But we just need to connect our FontAwesome .min CSS file, which is in version 4.70. So this is the old version. He just got the Kickstarter when this video is going to come out for, I think he might have a week to go for FontAwesome 5. But now that we have that going, we have, also we have a spelling syntax mistake here. But now that we've imported our FontAwesome, we're going to have to connect a icon. The way that the icons work, there's a couple different ways. So a couple different things you need to know. It's all pretty intuitive. So you're going to have this I class, and then, not li, just I. So this is where your icon goes. You don't actually need to put anything in here. What you need to do is pass a class that's going to be equal to fa. So it's always the fa stands for FontAwesome, and then the name of the class. In our example, it'd be fa-youtube-play. And let's go ahead real quick and give this guy some love, and go to just type in FontAwesome real quick so you can see all the great icons that they have. And the guy has released a ton of stuff. And so let's go icons. So 675 icons in FontAwesome. I believe there's even a free CodeCamp one now. So there's free CodeCamp's the newest one. So you know, anyone who supports free CodeCamp is a friend of mine. And you can see they have everything: calendars, bullseye, bugs. So you can use this for a lot of things, and that's why I really wanted to include it as kind of the, you know, the small additional library to get familiar with. So in here we include fa-youtube-play, and then because we're going to do some CSS later, I'm going to go ahead and apply this YouTube icon. Now this isn't, you don't need to do this for FontAwesome. This is something that we're going to do in our own CSS. But now when we run it, we have our icon. Let's go ahead and pass in our channel info at this point. Put a space because we want it to just look a little bit nicer. And here we have our header info.mychannel, or in your case, maybe your LinkedIn or your portfolio. And you'll see right here, we have our little link here. This is looking a little blue. We don't really like that. We want it to really kind of be that YouTube red, and we don't have to get too complicated with the actual red. There's a lot of stuff that we can do for that, but for the time being, we can just go ahead and pass in YouTube actually has like a specific offset of red, my understanding is. I looked it up one time when I did my portfolio. I'm not too anal about these sort of things, but there we go. It just looks a little bit, it's still gonna connect because we want it to, but we'll have it there. So we have our heading going right now. Not a whole bunch of craziness. Now the next section, we're going to continue on with adding our image. So just as a reminder, because we've been going about 15-20 minutes, you'll see we're going to add this image and we're going to connect it to open up the random API. So let's go ahead and continue on with that. At this point, let's go ahead and jump on down. Now, the API to open up a random link is pretty straightforward and has already been included in the, if you're doing this through free CodeCamp, or if you're not, this is the API. Let me, one second here. So we're going to, in our Angular application, we're going to create some data binding, and we're just going to call this random link, and this is going to be the link that when we go to it will take us to a random English link. By English, I mean the English version of Wikipedia's API. And this is it right here. You can pause the video and copy it, but it's in.wikipedia.org/wiki/special:\random. And so as we showed earlier in the video, it'll take us to a random link. Now what we want to do here is we want to go ahead and create our image ID. So we're going to pass in an image. We're going to give it an ID to style later, and we're just going to call this wiki. And then we're going to give it a source. The source is where the image comes from. This was an image I just got off of the internet. So find any image that you think is relevant, pass it in there. Let's go ahead and save this real quick. And because image tags in HTML5 don't have a closing bracket, we don't have to include that. So there's our image tag, not linked to anything yet. But what we want to do is we want to wrap it in an anchor tag real quick that we're going to pass in ng-href here. And then we're going to, on top of it, we are going to pass in our random link. Not similar, exactly how we passed in my channel info earlier. So we're going to pass in random link. The only difference is it's not part of a parameter or object, it's just its own variable. So now, optional thing to do, target equals to blank. This is something I generally like to do. Save that, now we can run it. It's always good to test these little things as you go forward, and you'll see that now everything is working. We're at this random link page. Now the next thing that we need to do is we actually have to go ahead and create a search bar. Now we're using Bootstrap, which has a grid column system. To get started, let's go ahead and create a container class. So we have this div here, and the container will bring everything in from the edges. We don't necessarily want everything to touch, and we're going to add a class called text center. So container, and then we're going to add this class text-center, which is going to center our text. Now let's save that and run it, and now everything's looking a little cleaner. I usually don't worry about too much CSS, but sometimes when you're doing your code, it really does help to format this piece by piece, just so things are organized, so it doesn't look super messy, and it makes you feel like you actually got some shit done, which is equally important, So you don't want to feel like you didn't have get anything done. Now that it's centered, I feel like I did some stuff right now. But so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a search bar real quick, and in our search bar, we're going to do it right below here. We're going to use the div, the row column system. Now, if you're not familiar with Bootstrap and the row column system, basically you have a row, it goes left to right, and then you set up how many columns in that row it's going to take up. Bootstrap uses 12, so if I wanted to have the search be half of the screen and or the search button and then the search input, it'd be call-medium-6. There's different sizes for this based on pixels. We just do medium to get the point across. And then you would have half and half. What we want to do is actually, just because the search button is going to be rather small, we're going to have the column take up 11 out of the 12, and then the search button take up 1. So to start that, you can go ahead and create this div class, set it equal to a row. Now you don't have to do this, but this is just something that will help you organize your code a little bit, and it's a little intro to basic Bootstrap. Now, chances are that if you're doing AngularJS, you probably have had some experience with HTML, and so this is mainly review. But if it's not, let's just continue on now. What was I doing here before I got lost? All right, so we're creating now we're going to create our div that is going to have call-md-11, and as I said earlier, we're going to go ahead and pass in our input. So we're going to have this input class with a class form control, which is just a Bootstrap class, which will inherit some stuff, some styling, all that sort of stuff. Don't think too much about it. And then we're going to have an ng model. So the reason, so our ng model is how we store data from the HTML, similar to how we have this random link. This is how we're going to connect our HTML to our random link, for instance, or our as we go on, our search term. So data binding works two ways. It's two-way binding. Currently, we've only been doing it one way. We've been doing it from the JavaScript to the HTML. Now, if we want to do from the HTML to the JavaScript, we need to use ngModel, and that's what we're going to do right now. So it's basically saying, look, this variable is equal to this in the JavaScript, and we need to change that value. And that's what we're going to be doing with our ngModel right now. So we're going to set up an ngModel that's going to be equal to search term. This would be equivalent to our vm.search term or our scope.search term. So we're going to do this. And then what else did I have here? We're going to go ahead and set a placeholder. Placeholder is nice. It makes it look clean in our input. It's basically just going to be some grayed out text that's going to make it look fancy, like we know what we're doing. And then we can go ahead and do some other stuff in a second. Now, let's go ahead and run this, make sure we have some stuff that's working. So you'll see we have our placeholder. This is taking up 11. It has this nice blur effect. Blur is when it has something selected. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and create our search button. Our search button is going to allow us to run the function that's going to do the API call that's going to load all of this out. Now, we can do that right here. Just below it. And remember how we set up this div to take up 11 rows? We're going to go ahead and set the same thing for the button to only take up the remaining one. So do that. And then we're going to just create an anchor tag. Set ahref. And we're going to set this equal to, actually no href, excuse me. So and in here, we're going to use a bootstrap class to style the button so that, because again, this is just an anchor tag, but we want it to look a little bit nice, like a button. So we're going to use this btn primary. We're also going to set an ID later on for search that we will use to style it. And then we are going to, actually, that's it. So let's go ahead and put in here search, run this, make sure our HTML is looking pretty nice, pretty fancy. Oh, so this is, now is it because I'm zoomed in, or let's see what the problem is. So we have this div call MD11, trying to see what the issue is. So there's something going on here where our stuff isn't being put over nicely. Now let me look at my code real quick, make sure I didn't mess up anything. So we have this. Let's go ahead and tidy our HTML a little bit. So this div goes here, this div goes here, this div goes here, this div is controller. So div class is equal to row. Did I not import bootstrap? I did. All right, let's not worry about that too much, and we'll get back to why this isn't working properly later on. I actually don't do anything with this search. This was a mistake in my code that I need to take out, which I'll do out of my current one. And in our hashtag wiki. Okay, so let's not worry too much about this search not working. We'll figure that out in a little bit. Now, before we move on, we can go ahead and style it up a little bit before we do the HTML. Just get all that done. Now, I just assigned a simple background to our body. So we're just gonna say, look, contact the body, and we have a background image, I should say. So background-image, and we're gonna pass in the URL for where that background image is located. Again, I just took this from the internet, so sorry if I'm spamming your site. Let's go and run that, make sure everything looks clean. So we don't want it necessarily to repeat like that, so there's a couple things that we can do. We can, for one, we can go ahead and set on background. I kind of just like the simple one time, but everything is up to you. This is just some simple CSS, so we can do background-repeat and then no repeat. Let's go ahead and run that, and you'll see that that isn't moving at all. So, but I actually, or isn't repeating at all, but I actually want it to stay in the same place. I don't want it to move up and down like that. Again, just a preference thing. So the way that we can do that is we can use the background dash attachment, and we can use fixed. And let's go ahead and save that and run this. And then cool. So you see how now the Wikipedia background isn't moving at all. Now the next thing I want to do is I don't want to use this little font. I'm going to use Lobster font. You can go ahead and get this font off of, or any font from Google's free API. We're going to be throwing this into the header section like we did with the FontAwesome stuff. Save that. And now we want to assign the font, which is going to be font-family. And because this is a third-party font, or not a browser font, we're going to go ahead and we need to use the quotes here. Use Lobster, save it, and now run it. And this should apply Lobster to everything in our body. So it's looking a little cleaner. It doesn't actually do anything yet, but it's looking a little cleaner. But it's fun. Next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and change the background color of this wiki. It doesn't really stand out very well with this white background. So we're going to change the image a little bit. So let's go ahead and target that. Remember, we used the wiki ID for that. And we're going to go ahead and set a background dash color. And we will set that to, I guess this color, whatever. I don't know how I even came about this color. So let's go ahead and run that. You're not going to see anything right now because it's, oh, we will actually. So you'll see how these, I don't necessarily like the squares. I want it to be curved. I was thinking we weren't going to have a background on this, but I guess I was wrong. We're going to do border radius. Border radius is how you're going to curve the corners. Now, I believe at 50% it actually becomes a circle, if I remember correctly, if you want to do something like that. So that's the background, though, not the image. But we actually, that's way too much. We just want to do 25 px to curve the corners, or whatever you think looks good. So there's our curved corners, but it's touching our search input bar. We don't really want that to happen. So we can do margin dash bottom, and we'll go ahead and put 25 px. It's going to run that. And you'll see now it's lifted up off the bottom. The top's all right. Nothing to really worry about there. And I don't think, one second guys, I'm testing something in my other code because I have this line of code that I don't think actually does anything. Yeah, so all right, cool, let me go ahead and take that out. It's funny when I redo these things, it's like I get it to work and then I was like, all right, cool, it works. Fuck everything else. So I don't actually go back and look through here, but as I do them now, I find like, oh, I don't actually need this line. I had this display inline code. But anyhow, now that we're going through here, one quick thing that we can do is we can see, do I even want to do it? I was going to say we can find out why our code isn't lining up correctly, but I think we can worry about that in a little bit. This really should be call -md-1 call. So let's see what happens when we set this equal to 6 and see if that actually will do it differently. Huh. Oh, I see what's going on. So naturally I made a mistake. So we need to close our div right here, and we never did. Now we may have one extra div tag, and we'll have to fix that later on, which it looks like we do. So let's go ahead and close this div, and then we need to remove one of these divs as well. So simple nesting issue. Now when we run this, so this needs to go back to 1, and then the other one needs to go back to 11. It's funny how these little things always bug you. It's like we're doing this complex, not complex, but we're doing Angular, and it's like, why isn't this centered properly? Okay, so now our app looks great, or it looks decent for the time we've put into it, I should say. And now when we type in hello and we search, nothing happens. So let's go ahead and change that. And this is pretty easy as far as things go. Now, 1 second. Where's my ngrepeat loop? Okay, so what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to create a span right below that is going to, so right below this div, we're going to have, this is where our content's going to go out. The way that we're going to do this is we're going to load our div with some data, or load our array with some data, and then we're going to ngrepeat that data out in a certain way. So we're just going to create a simple div, close the div so I don't make the same mistake. And then in here, we're going to go ahead and, you don't need this span really. We could probably just put in the div, but since I like following the same examples I did before, we'll go ahead and do this. So ngrepeat is basically says repeat every item in an array. Now we're going to have this info in search term r0. Now I'm going to show you what this means right now. So this is we're not doing anything with this yet, but the way that we end up getting our URL is, first let's do our API call. Let's set up our API call before I kind of dive into this. Now we used to, in the last one we did a http.get as a way of doing that. Now because of the way that the Wikipedia API is written, it gets a little complicated with that, and we're going to do a traditional HTTP call to get it to work. The way that we do that is a HTTP, and then we're going to pass in some parameters. And then the first thing that we're going to pass in is the URL. This is going to be the URL that we're going to need to get this to work. Now the first part is this section here. Let me go ahead and pass this in like so. So what's happening here is we're basically saying, look, what's the action? The action's open search. And the open search basically means you're going to run a search. And search here, we're setting what are we running a search on. And this is where we're going to pass in plus vm.searchTerm. Now, if I remember correctly, if I did the same thing. So remember our ng model here is actually the value that is in our input box. So it's going to concatenate that with whatever's in our input box. So that's what the search term is. And then we're going to add this plus, and we're going to add, let me call it, copy it over so I don't make any mistakes. So we're going to copy this over. And we're going to add at format, meaning we want a JSON object. So the format of the data we're going to get back is JSON, and the callback is going to be JSON_callback. Now that's going to be our URL, but that's not the only thing that we need to do. We need to set up the method to be a JSONP. This is basically why we have to do it as a in this fashion rather than the simple HTTP GET we've done in the past, because it requires a few more inputs than the other one does. Now on success, meaning that everything passed, we're going to pass in a function that takes a response. Or, this could be your data. Response is the traditional way of doing it. And then we're going to do something with that data. Now, right now, what we're going to do is we're going to create an array up here. Remember how we created this array right here, search term r. Now, I think before we do that, we should console.log out our URL to make sure that it works. Now, if it console.logs in success, it means it successfully ran, and we should be able to console.log our URL out. Is this going to get this? Actually, we may have to do it right here. Actually, let's console.log our response. And let's go ahead and run this. We'll pull up the console in a second. So we'll type in hello, and then we'll search. And now when we go to our console, you'll see we have all this data here. vm.search undefined. So what's funny is this ran right now, but our VM search term referred to undefined instead. It didn't actually get our search term, which is interesting. So let's go ahead and see why that would be. ng model is equal to search term, vm.search term. Undefined, Jesus Christ. You never You never do this right the first time, man. All right, so let's go to our gmodel search term, vm.search term. Oh man, it fucking ran, but it ran undefined. Jesus. Ah, so I see what happened. So remember how I said we were going to run this? We were in click search and it was going to run. We haven't actually set this up to our ng click. Excuse me. So I made a little bit of a, I goofed a little bit here, guys. So I forgot to set. So when we run this, it's gonna run undefined because it immediately runs it right now. So what we actually need to do. Sorry about this, guys. This is all correct so far. We need to set up this vm.search wiki, and we're going to set this equal to a function. And we're just going to throw everything we had in here into this function. We don't want this to run automatically, and that's what was going on there. I was like, what the hell is going on? Okay, so let's go ahead and save that. And now let's clear the console. Want to make sure everything's working all right. We can go ahead and run that, and you'll see now when it refreshes, nothing runs in here. Now what we're going to use is the ngClick directive on our search button. Remember how we have our search button? Where is that? Right here. So when this is clicked, we want it to go ahead and call our search wiki. Now we're making the assumption that, of course, it's going to have something in there, and it's going to be able to search for it. So we're not going to write any logic. So if it's undefined, not to search for it or anything like that, we don't care about that. So let's go ahead and run this. And now when we search, we type in hello, and we click search, pull this up, and it did not work. Why did it not work? Go back to my code, and it is because I forgot to put the brackets because it's a function. All right, this time I guarantee with about 50% assurance that it's going to run. All right, so there we go. So we have this object here that's going to run very nicely. So let's go ahead and see if we can. I wonder if we can console.log this here. The reason I want to console.log, yeah, this isn't going to work. So console.log search wiki.url. Now I'll be very surprised if this works. I don't think we can do this within it. Just a few things I want to test real quick. Yeah, okay. Forget that. I just wanted to copy over the URL so you guys could see it. But easy enough. What we'll do is I want to explain how we're going to set up our ngrepeat. So we can just copy this over. And we're going to go into a, actually, before we do this, we're going to gut out this search term in the plus, and we're going to take out that, and we're going to take out that, and we're just going to pass in the word hello right here. Hello. And now we'll have a working API, I think. So we can see our data object. Remember our JSON object. So this is what we're actually getting back from our API call. You'll see this is our search term, and then on index 0, or index 0, or index 1, then the nested index, we have our titles, then index 2, and then our nested index, and the index 0, 1, 0, 1. These are all index 0, and then nested indexes. It'll make a little sense. It's a weird way of doing this, in all honesty. It could have been done a little bit cleaner, but it's not too bad. So this is what our data object is going to be. So now all we have to do is, in our ngrepeat, we're actually not repeating anything yet because we haven't added anything to our array. What we're going to do is we're going to do vm.search term R. Did I already create that up here? Nope. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to do vm.search term R, and we're going to set that equal to an empty array. This is going to be the array right here. And then we're going to search term R dot push, and what do we want to push? We want to go ahead and push response and then index 1, which will be the titles, and then we want to go ahead and push index 2, which will be the descriptions, and then we want to go ahead and push the links to those articles, which will be the links. Now, what are we going to output in our span here? Now we just have to style it accordingly how we want the data to come out. We'll do an anchor tag because remember we have to link all this. And the way I did it was I just linked the whole thing basically, or I linked the title. So we're going to do an anchor tag with an nghref. And we're going to set this equal to search term. Oh, I don't even use info. Interesting. I did something very strange right here. Search term R2 is not the way we should be doing this. We should actually be using info. But because of the way that the JSON object was set up, I did it a little differently. So we're going to be passing in the index value. So remember how we knew what index we were on? This is something built into, this is a parameter or a property of ngrepeat, is you can let the ngrepeat keep track of the index, and we're going to iterate through each instance in the index, which is 10. So it's going to go 10 times. And it's going to go index. So this is index 0. Get that first one, get that second one, get that third one. And that's all we're doing here. So don't be too confused by that. It's just going to keep track of what index we're on. And then that will be our anchor tag. The next thing we want to do is create an h1. And remember, real quick, remember that this was, we'll put title, just so, because it gets a little confusing with the way they do the JSON callback or the JSON data. So I know I did when I try to explain this right now and when I did this originally. So it goes title, then description, and then article link. So when we're hard coding in this 2, remember this 2 is the article link right here, because it goes index 0, 1, and 2 that we're pushing to our search term array. Even though it says response 3, it's response 3 in the JSON object, so it can get a little confusing, which is why I'm putting those comments in there right now. Now, I pass in this index just to keep track. We want to be able to see what index we're on, or we want it to appear like a list, but because indexes always start with 0, we want it to actually, we want to put +1, so it starts with 1, goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, because each one of our spots has 10 values. And then we're going to go ahead and pass in the info of that item, which is the array value in our instance. Does that make sense? So we're going to pass in info, and then let's go ahead and save this and run it so we can see before we pass in the description. So we'll type in hello. We will search here, and you'll see now we have all the titles that are linked in our object. So in our array. So this 1 is the index, which we added 1 to, so it doesn't start at 0, and goes down all the way to 10. Now the next thing is we just have to go ahead and add the descriptions and a little bit of styling. So we did an h1, and then we followed up with an h2. In our h2, we're going to go ahead and pass in the search term R1, which remember is right here, the description, response 2, or the second item. All these numbers kind of offset by 1 are a little bit confusing for me, so I apologize if I sound like I'm going over things a couple times. I just want to make sure everyone kind of is getting how the object is set up, or the array is set up, because I know when I did this I was a little bit confused. And then we're going to go into the index. So there's array 1 has 3 indexes. Index 0 is our title, and then that's those are our titles, which has an array in there of 10 titles. Then you go to index 2, or index 1 rather, which is a description, which then has an array of the descriptions in there, which has 10 descriptions. And then finally, index 2, our third item, has an array in it of 10 links. That's what's going on right here. So now when we run this, and then we want to put in an HR here, which is a horizontal rule, just to kind of break it up a little bit for styling. And now we type in hello, and we do our search. We'll have our descriptions and everything. I actually don't want the links to be like that. It's too blue for me. So made a little mistake. We actually want to gut this out of the anchor tag, and we want to change our HR. If you look at our HRs here, you'll see that it's not too noticeable. I wanted mine to be a little bit more noticeable to really showcase how it was broken up. The way that we can style our HR is pretty simple. We can just target, since there's only one HR, we can just target the entire thing. We'll say, look, set the border of it, and we want to do 5 pixels. We want it to be solid, and we want it to be black. You can style it however you want. I just wanted mine to be a little bit more noticeable. And then here we go. Finally, hello, search, and now we have our links. Probably one last thing of setting this equal to target equals to blank. Target equal to, I'm kind of neurotic about this target equal to blank thing. I just realized right now, because I do this all the time. Like, it always seems to make sense to me. But all right, guys, so we did hello, and now you'll see we did a we have our links. We kept track of them using the index property of ngrepeat, and then we kind of style it through. So that was the AngularJS Learn AngularJS Part 3 Wikipedia API inspired by FreeCodeCamp's intermediate front-end projects. If you liked it, go ahead and check out my channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Support me on Patreon. I'm trying to build up my Patreon so we can get 4K videos coming soon. The things to take away from this, hopefully by now you understand data binding goes 2 ways. You can also use how to set up, ng app, ng controller, all that sort of stuff. You learned a little bit about maybe Bootstrap. We introduced you to FontAwesome, which will be crucial in building your own websites. nghref we used before. We used it again. Now we used the row column system from Bootstrap. We also use ngModel, which you should be somewhat familiar with. We talked about placeholders, which is basic HTML. We used ngClick, and then we iterated through a very pain in the ass array object here. But more than anything else, what you really need to understand is there's multiple ways sometimes to do these API calls, and just to get comfortable with understanding that based on how the API is set up, you may have to do a JSON P call because of the security settings of the API. There's nothing that you can basically do about it. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. I had fun. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. Special thanks to our sponsor, DevMountain. Go to devmountain.com if you're interested in coding boot camps where housing is included in the tuition, so you can get up and go and not have to worry about where you're going to live. You can just go and immerse yourself fully in the experience, and check them out. And special thanks to you who support me on Patreon. If you want to make sure I keep putting out more content, Patreon's a great place to support me. But as always, guys, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.